Continue our bill hearing on essentially Senate Bill 291, potential comments on 224, but again, we're focusing on Senate Bill 291. Before we get started, though, I want to open it up to any bill requests. I do believe we have a couple. Yes, sir.
Kevin Barone here on behalf of the Kansas Massage Therapists Association. It is, oh, I gotta find it. A bill number, where's my RS number? Sorry. It is, well, I gotta find it. It's the bill giving licensure for massage therapists, and it's 23 RS. I think it's 15930.
15930. I think Jason's
got it already.
Okay, we're good.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that.
Good shape there. No problem at all. Committee, any discussion or objection to the introduction to that bill? Seeing none, that is introduced. I think Katie Huisman has one also. Katie?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. One bill introduction this morning. Katie Wisman, thank you. The bill number is 23 RS 1534 concerning school districts.
Committee, any discussion or objections to introduction to that bill? Seeing none, the bill is introduced.
Thank you.
I think Senator Blasey is going to be watching online today for this, and just so we know as we continue. We do have neutral and opponent testimony today, so that we have time to ask questions afterward. I'm going to try to limit the testimony to 5 minutes. If somebody goes a little bit short, then we can extend it. I want to be able to hear everyone's concerns and then just have time for questions for committee. So committee, I think we're ready to go. Any other business before we get started? Seeing none, we will bring up then our first neutral oral testimony, and that's Alex Orrell from the Kansas Bankers Association. Alex?
Hi, good morning, committee. Brevity of time, I will not go too deep into who the KBA is, but Alex Orrell, Senior Vice President of Government Relations, and happy to be here today to talk about RS 1490 or Senate Bill 91 and Senate Bill 224. Just for the record, at the outset, we are officially opposed to Senate Bill 224. There's many reasons for that. Intervening in the government and the free market, government mandates, government registries, punitive penalties, lots of concerns with that bill. But we're happy to see, Senate Bill 291 coming, to fruition. I still think it needs some work. We're officially neutral on the RS number. We thought when we were looking at this hearing, the RS number last week was going to be more similar to HB 2436. And if I sound a little winded, it just came from the House hearing on HB 2436. So really neutral on the majority of 291, but I can on new section 5. I do think there's going to be some work on that, either work or frankly maybe even just pulling it from the bill. There's been a lot of conversations that's happened over the last 24 hours to 48 hours when many people saw the disclosure language, that when this bill didn't get released until, late Monday afternoon, a lot of people, different groups that weren't involved in the earlier conversations with that were caught a little off guard, and they've approached us and others on it on some concerns. More than willing to work on some language, but I can't state that we're full neutrality on Senate Bill 291. I can say full neutrality on everything besides new section 5. So this is kind of a different testimony for me, Mr. Chairman, to give this. But I know this committee hasn't had a deep dive into what ESG is, as well as what's going on nationally on this. And so in my testimony, I included a lot of attachments. The first one you're going to see on page 5 of my testimony is an article penned by my president CEO, Doug Wareham, about the concern of this ESG being a pendulum. You swing too far to the right, swing back and hit you right back in the face. These things come back both ways. These political government mandates and government intervention just tend to never actually work out in the end. But bottom line, our guiding principle on this issue, you'll see on page 2 of my testimony, is banks, and this could go for businesses too, should be able to lend to, invest in, and generally do business with any entity or activity that is legal without government interference. Banks should also be free not to lend, invest, or otherwise engage so long as they do not violate fair lending and other anti-discrimination laws. I do believe the majority of this bill addresses many of those concerns. Like I said, previous proposals, not a fan of, but some of where we're headed, as I like where it's going. On page 6 of my testimony, I'm going to do a little federal piece of this because I think this is a major federal issue that I think most people here in the state capitol are recognizing or starting to recognize that, you know, what the SEC and what the Federal Reserve and what some of these FDIC, federal regulatory agencies, are doing and putting our industry and trying to make us the police force. We're being put in a very tough position. We have federal regulators that are going way further than their legislative authority, and that's designated in page 6. You know, they issued a proposed rule that would require registrants to include certain climate-related disclosures in their registration to have a material impact on business results, operations, financial conditions, certain climate-related financial statement metrics. They do not have the authority to do that. The Federal Reserve is also looking at, on page 8, having our large financial institutions go through a climate impact exercise. Once again, where's the authority? They don't have it. What is happening at the federal level? Page 11, you'll see at the House Financial Services Committee, Patrick McHenry from North Carolina has formed a working group on this issue to study it and look at and bring some of these federal regulatory agencies to Capitol Hill and ask them where their authority is. Just last week, U.S. Senate passed a bipartisan measure that goes against the president's labor rule, Labor Department rule that permits fiduciary retirement fund managers to consider climate change, good corporate governance, and other factors making investments on behalf of plan participants. That passed the Senate in a bipartisan fashion, but the president has said he's going to veto it. So please, when you're looking at this issue, recognize the federal sides of this, because some of these things that you try and do at the state level to fix some of what's going on federally, you just can't do at the state level. And I hate telling state lawmakers that, but it is a reality. Also, you know, some of the impacts that you could see from, you know, some of the bad language we've seen on page 13. You know, there was proposals to look at some of this economic boycott language, and it's been implemented in Texas. And the muni debt service in that state has gone up $532 million because of it. You increase regulation, decrease competition, it's going to rise costs. So I know, Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to be brief on time. I know there was comments made regarding Section 28 of Senate Bill 224. That piece of the proposal definitely gives us major concern and could even move us to an opposition position if the committee decides to move in that direction. But once again, I respect the people that have been working on the ESG legislation to address many of our concerns. Many of them have been addressed in this bill, and I appreciate the proponents of it willingness to work with us. That's how we do business here in Kansas. It's not D.C., and thank God we're not. So appreciate the time, Mr. Chairman, and I know I'm short on time, and I'll take questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Alex. We'll ask questions of the neutral after everybody's had time to weigh in here. Next up on the neutral testimony is Michael Murray from Kansas Credit Union. Michael?
Everyone, thank you so much for the opportunity. Michael Murray, the Executive Director of the Kansas Credit Union Association. Just real quick, our association represents credit unions throughout Kansas, over 700,000 members. We've had plenty of issues before this committee before, so I know you're pretty familiar there, and just want to make sure you understand that this is one of those days where the banks and credit unions are in the foxhole together. There's plenty, including this bill, where we've been similarly positioned, just on the lookout for direct impact on financial institutions in Kansas, and for that reason, we're neutral on Senate Bill 291, which for the most part, as Alex said, mirrors language introduced on the House side, with the exception of Section 5, which I'm still getting some direction on, but I can also express pure neutrality on the rest of that bill. As stated in previous committees as well, ESG legislation is not inherently anti-financial institution. It's the way that you go about it, and we appreciate the deliberation this past year and the consideration on some of the punitive provisions in our testimony, such as either fines or misdemeanor crimes placed directly on financial institutions, would obviously be the sticking point for us going forward. And it's important to know that just the direct impact of either a fine or getting slapped with something civilly or criminally. That's not the main deterrent that I'm worried about for credit unions. I don't believe that credit unions will use social credit scores in Kansas. They're member-owned, member-operated, equal voting shares from their members. I would challenge anybody to find a credit union that is going to be is a clear majority one ideology or another and enforce that ideology on their business decisions. I don't think that's going to happen. But like with any other regulation, whether it's from the federal or state level, everything involved in complying with those regulations, it's a burden on our members. It's one of the main contributing factors to community banks and credit unions closing throughout the state, creating banking deserts. So we're on the lookout for that. Is even if we're worried about the process for litigating and dispensing with accusations of using social credit scores, and that's as discussed in Senate Bill 224, which we are opposed to on that. But Senate Bill 291, thank you so much for your efforts throughout this past year, and we are neutral on the contents of that. And yeah, quick federal piece as well. We've been in discussion with our federal delegation on efforts going forward for sincere oversight over both federal regulators and any of the large private entities that are some of the original instigators of this trend nationwide. And it sounds like there is going to be movement on that front, but I can't really speak for them, and I'd encourage everyone to reach out to the federal delegation as they can. But bottom line, same as just discussed by Alex, the proponents here, I mean, the main underlying concern is an intervention in the free market in Kansas from large out-of-state entities, private or public or otherwise federal government. We haven't seen a whole lot yet, but your local financial institutions, are trying to stay neutral on issues as long as the reaction to that isn't also then an intervention in the free market, but from the other way. So from the outside going in, telling people who they can't do business with, and then the reaction being that you absolutely are compelled to do business with folks is, kind of an equal and opposite intervention in the free market, and that's our main line there. But other than that, neutral on Senate Bill 291, and happy to take questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. Our final neutral oral testimony comes from Eric Stafford. I think Eric is over in the House right now. Senate Commerce, yeah, he's running back and forth. Committee, why don't we open up for questions for our neutral, and then we'll catch Eric when he gets in here. Senator Longmire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Alex, probably.
Okay.
Alex, you mentioned in your testimony a couple of times about some concerns with Section 5. Are your concerns based on a mandate on private business, or the wording that may imply something that may or may not be true, or both, I guess?
It would be both, Senator. The first statement there, in environmental social governance investing may limit your return on investment compared investments that do not use such criteria. I believe that is more of a statement or a political statement than facts. I know there's been arguments saying that some have lost money, but I think there has some that have made money too. So when you're talking about some of these clean energy, funds, just look at Kansas, for instance. You have the Southwest Power Pool. It's a regional transmission organization, controls their grid for a multi-state region. I know, Mr. Chairman, as chair of the utilities, you understand this one. But on any given day, you can look at the grid and generation, and we're like 40% wind. I'm not a utility person. I'm just stating 40% of the market. So are people choosing to invest in those companies? There's federal tax credits and things involved in that too, but, well, yeah, they're 40% of the market. Why wouldn't they? So I would challenge that first sentence, and then also, yeah, the intervention just onto a mandate on businesses and making them do this.
Yeah, well, just a comment. I appreciate that answer. I received a tremendous amount of inquiries last night, yesterday afternoon, from some of the state's largest insurance companies. So not only bankers, but insurance companies and a number of people that are stockbrokers, brokerage houses that are very, very concerned about the mandate on private business and the language that's included in Section 5. So appreciate the clarification.
Senator Fasquedo, then Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alex, so in your testimony, you mentioned, and I didn't hear you clearly, you mentioned $5 million or a number that people either lost on the federal level.
The federal legislation that's going on was a vote to vote down a labor rule that would push an ESG agenda there. That was voted in a bipartisan fashion in the United States Senate and the U.S. House. And so, yeah, it was a vote. If I said dollars, my apologies. I was maybe rushing through my words.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of a two-part question here. Do you believe that lending practices should be based solely on financial solvency and your ability to repay a loan? Or do you believe it should be based on what your political beliefs are or what your environmental practices are? What's your opinion on that? Or speaking for the association?
Right. No, absolutely. It definitely needs to be based on your financial measures. But here in Kansas, this is what we've been telling the federal folks about looking at the climate and looking at, that's not being anti-climate necessarily. Kansas bankers take into effect conservation, water, how's the soil going to produce long term? They're looking at those issues too. It's not anti, or ESG or whatever you want to call it. Those are factors that they've been looking at for 100 years. Are you going to have enough water in your area to irrigate that land? That's not pushing a social agenda. That's just looking at the facts of the things that they have in front of them for the places they are lending. Yes, you need to be credit worthy. Absolutely. Also, that financial institution needs to have the scale. One, sometimes, if they get turned down for, somebody comes in and gets a loan and they get turned down for something, it might not be because they, dislike oil and gas or dislike gun manufacturers and whatnot. They might not have the expertise. Banks all specialize in different industries. They just don't do everything. So they might not have the expertise, the scale, or that's, maybe that's not their bread and butter. And or at the same time, for just a business, right? Maybe they don't want to do business because they, frankly, maybe don't get along with you. That's the market. And the market can respond accordingly. And in America, we're at a very good spot on the financial industry, and that's why we've been so successful. We have 4,300 institutions in this country. That's banks. If there is somebody that is turned down for a loan, I bet you there'll be somebody that's willing to talk to them and offer them that loan. Now, creditworthiness and those factors do come in. But yeah, financial first, of course.
Madam Mr. Chair, and if I may, could you give us a hypothetical scenario how this bill might specifically affect a lending decision?
Senate Bill 291 as written would not affect any of those decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I saw Eric Stafford walking. I do have one quick one for you, Alex.
Sir.
It looks like, quickly breezing through your testimony, and I appreciate that, that the ESG investment sort of is happening. You can't deny that. It appears, and with your testimony actually supports it, I think. So with regard to the registered investment advisors, and say we were to strengthen that language as suggested by the Attorney General, I think his concern was that people need to it's a transparency issue. People need to be aware that those investments are potentially in their portfolio and that they have the, I guess, not necessarily the option to opt out. They should know and be able to decide with their RIA whether or not these are good for their portfolio. And this is just saying, I realize now that these investments may exist. I don't understand what the objection to that transparency might be.
Sure. So I'll speak to Section 28, and I'll make a couple comments. Section 28 is a mandate on businesses telling them how they are, or who they are doing business with. My concern is the slippery slope on that. Where does that stop? You could bring in every social issue in the book and mandate businesses have to say they do business with, you name the social issues. I think it's a slippery slope when you start doing that on Section 28.
Okay.
Regarding new Section 5, that just general statement, I don't believe that is a generally accepted finance term or statement. I just don't believe it. I don't think it is. I think it's more of just a statement.
So if we could work with the parties to make sure we have the language that provides the transparency and satisfies those concerns, you'd still be neutral on the bill?
We, of course, would absolutely, as we've stated, we'd be open to having any conversations on working of new Section 5.
Okay.
But that, as Senator Longby said, that's more than just the Bankers Association. That is the multiple insurance companies and that are involved in the state, so I can't in good faith comment on behalf of them. It's much bigger than me. But my last comment on this piece, though, too, I mean, where is the individual responsibility piece of this? You know, don't people have the, I mean, we having government come in and take care of them? I mean, I think the market is shifting. Eric Stafford, I know, has some testimony on talking about this, what's going on with Vanguard and their board of directors and some of their policies on net zero. You know, the market is shifting on this because people are starting to see this. So I would just go back to, there is an individual responsibility to this piece. We don't need government to come in and solve all our problems all the time.
Okay. Let's go ahead, thanks, Alex. Let's go ahead and have Eric step up and provide his testimony, and appreciate he's been sprinting from one house to another. Eric?
Child care to ESG, Senator. It's a busy Wednesday in March, and the only saving grace is it's only Big 12 championship week, not March Madness week yet. So our times are later in the day that we need to make sure we focus on Kansas athletics, specifically Kansas State athletics. That was not an endorsement of the Jayhawks by any means on my part. In fact, the opposite. Thank you for the opportunity to be here as a neutral party on Senate Bill 291. You'll see our testimony when I drafted it Sunday. We did not quite have the bill number yet, but we are neutral on Senate Bill 291 and what I want to speak to about today. Really, and as Alex said, I'll kind of shift around through our testimony. You'll see the article cited by Reuters that was released in December that was quoting the Vanguard CEO basically saying that they're pulling out of any net zero investments because in their fiduciary duty to their clients, those investments are not providing the proper return on investment that they were trying to seek. So they're altering their approach. And I want to be clear that this bill is very neutral. It sets up Kansas in a very neutral position that we're not going to discriminate against nor create favors or advantages for certain policies or positions, and which I think is critical as no one can deny that ESG efforts are altering the free market. Private companies are using ideologies to alter the free market, but we have to be careful in how we respond to those efforts and not create penalties against businesses who choose for their decisions to come up with new approaches that they think might be best or better. So let the markets rule, and if they think that is the market, then let them try it. But now we have the response to those efforts to, in our view, potentially alter the market, and they're finding out it's not working or it's not as productive as other traditional investment strategies. And so we would just urge this committee and the legislature to be careful how we address the swings of the pendulum, right? As they go one way, don't bring stick a hammer on the other end, so when it comes back, it's very penalizing to the business community or financial community. some comments were made this week that we are a woke organization and have woke national banks that support our organization, and that's why we're weak on this issue. I don't think we're weak. I think we're consistent in the sense that we're wanting to maintain free markets wherever, just like we were on the COVID vaccine. It's a very similar line of logic that we did not want government intervention on employers, as 97% of our employers were not mandating the vaccine. They did not want to mandate the vaccine, and the 3% who were receiving federal contracts and were put in this box that they did not want to be in. They didn't ask to be put in that position, just like they're not going to be asked to be put in this position here. So we believe it's not that we have any sort of ideology other than just maintaining free markets and competition where we can, and not having government intervene itself in these areas. And for the record, we don't have any national banks that are members of our organization. So there is no Bank of America member within the Kansas Chamber. There is none of these national banks. We have a lot of Kansas banks. We have a lot of Kansas credit unions who are members of our organization. So, you know, it's nice to have talking points on radio shows that paint a picture of what an organization is, but I think our organization is consistent, if anything else, that we just want the free market to work. We believe that this approach is as close as you can get to keeping a neutral position for the state that does not impede itself in the ability of businesses to operate within the state of Kansas. So appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for accommodating me. I'm sorry I was late, but be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time on Senate Bill 291.
Actually, your perfect time to stand for questions if there are any from the committee. I do have a couple quickie questions, and with regard to these ESG type of investments that we know, when you've got a big firm like a BlackRock or Vanguard, and I know Vanguard's backing off to some degree, do you think they're doing so not because of what's happening at the federal level, but because there's the weight of the action coming from the states starting to realize that these ESG investments are a problem and being forced into it, that the state actions are starting to get their attention?
Yeah, that's honestly, Mr. Chairman, that's a really good question. I would say, yeah, there's probably some factor to that where you have some states starting to pull investments with certain areas, and when you're losing billions of dollars of assets, that's going to alter market behavior. And that should be the approach for what you guys have control over, right? I know I attended a conference in December when that was the discussion, is what states can do to address this, and it was pretty much entirely focused on handling and managing state investments. And so, yeah, I think there is some truth to that, but I think just the fact from what I read in that article, which you can click the link in the PDF that I provided in our testimony to read it. I think it was December 19th is when that came out, around there. Based on his words, though, they're realizing that the gains aren't there for what, you know, they were hoping to be. I mean, and you know, another point of what maybe they might have been going for, we saw the Inflation Reduction Act and how that is altering the market. And you know, that's not necessarily investment, so I'm kind of going down rabbit holes here. But it's the same kind of mindset where government is using itself to intervene in the free market to decide what is the best resource, right? So that could potentially be altering investment behavior. But ultimately, keeping a neutral approach to state policy is the best approach in our view. And I think the proponents and those who worked very diligently on this bill did a really good job of reaching that point, as good of a job as you can do in this arena.
With regard to social agenda driving investments, I think the housing bubble, 2007, 2008, is a perfect example. That was an example of government pouring billions of dollars into funding loans for people who weren't qualified, and people lost their entire investment, their retirement funds. They lost homes. Do you think we have a duty to stop the inflation of an asset bubble when we can see it happening again with regard to these ESG type investments?
Yeah, you know, I think a lot of people learned a lot from the housing bubble in 2007, 2008, 2009, where, you know, I was a younger, newer homeowner and not really going after the loans that were there. I was in a much different position in life at 27 years old. But those were you'd get qualified for your loan, but then you get qualified for a second loan. And if people are given money for cheap, there's individual accountability there too. It's not just on lenders or just not on government. But to the question that you asked, I guess I would counter. I don't know how much the state can do on a national picture on something like a housing bubble or a social governance type of an approach. I think you can do what the state can control, which is this focus here. But I think to our conversation on the previous question, if states respond to the ways that they can, you will see a change in market forces, I think, just by folks saying, hey, you know what, we're not going to invest in these firms or investment funds. So I think it could alter behavior, but I would probably say that the state's relatively limited on what you can do to have an impact on your own. Collectively, if other states are doing similar things, yes, there's probably going to be a counter response. But I would be reluctant to say that the state has a lot of control in what happens on a more national picture.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Eric. You represent the Kansas Chamber. Does the Kansas Chamber partner or have any members that are energy companies?
Yes, we do have energy companies as members.
And could you tell us who those are?
Yeah, happy to. I might miss some. We have Evergy, we have NextEra, we have Midwest Energy, we have Sunflower, we have a few other co-ops. I'm going blank. We have ITC. So yeah, we have quite a few energy companies who are members of ours.
Okay. Do you have any natural resource companies that are members of the chamber?
Such as?
Oil and gas?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. See, there we go. Leaving them out. Kansas Gas, yes. Kansas Gas is a member of ours. Yeah, so we do have oil and gas companies, American Petroleum Institute. We have some oil companies that are members as well. Holly Frontier. I'm trying to go through. But yes, we do have a significant number of oil and gas members as well.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. And out of those energy companies, how many of them are Kansas-owned or Kansas-based?
I wouldn't be able to tell you. Obviously, our rural co-ops are owned by the people within the district, but I couldn't tell you out of, I don't know all of them who's owned by what. I don't know where Kansas Gas is technically owned out of. I know they cover service territories in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas under One Oak, but yeah, I don't know where they're headquartered or.
Okay, but for example, the major players, Evergy, NextEra, are they Kansas-owned?
Well, I mean, Evergy was owned by LA Management. I don't think they're headquartered in Kansas. NextEra, I think, is headquartered in Florida. But based on your question, those companies aren't asking for us to take a position on anti-ESG efforts or pro-ESG efforts from the oil side or any renewable energy side. I mean, our members understand our mission to support the free competitive enterprise and benefit all Kansans. So I think we've had some bills this year where we've opposed our energy members because we feel like it violates the spirit of competition and free markets. And we're not going to always have to, we hope our members, what we say to them, it's like, look, we're with you 99 times out of 100 for the collective good of the state. I hope that they understand that. And I think that the response has been that they do. And we do want to work with our members as partners to find what is the best approach to help grow the state of Kansas. That's our mission.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you, Eric. We appreciate that.
Thank you all.
Committee, we also have 3 written-only conferees here with testimony to review. And then we'll move on to are there any other neutrals in the audience before we move on? Seeing none, we'll move on then to oral opponent testimony, and Alan Conroy, Executive Director of Capers. Alan?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Glad to be here. And usually KPERS is not a proponent or an opponent of legislation. It just provides information for you, the policymakers, to sort out and make an informed decision. Unfortunately, on this bill, I think the KPERS is in a position, unfortunately, to have to oppose this bill as it's introduced. And I might just quickly talk about maybe just a little bit of background and then maybe three of the concern areas, and then we have language in the testimony that we think would address some of those concerns. First, of course, KPERS is a fiduciary, as is all of our fund managers. All of the KPERS Trust Fund is externally managed. We don't manage any of those KPERS, that $25 billion internally. So it's externally managed. And those fund managers are fiduciaries as well. And you probably know as fiduciary, whether it's the KPERS board or those fund managers have to provide the highest moral, legal, and ethical service to satisfy the needs of the trust fund, of the KPERS members. And so all the fiduciaries, it's the sole purpose is to, the only purpose of the KPERS Trust Fund is to provide funding for our members. And of course, that's what we're all about. We also then, so all the investment decisions have to be for that sole purpose. Also, I just point out in 1992, so going back a ways, the legislature has some language, current law, that says that prohibits any social or economic investing. That's the primary purpose. And kind of hate to show the dirty KPERS laundry, but there were some difficult investments back in 1992, investigative committee, subpoenas, all those kinds of things. And part of that was how much it was targeting. The concern was too much of the KPERS fund was being used for economic development in Kansas. And ultimately, that language then was passed that there can be no investing, that the sole purpose is social or economic. And so that's just kind of the background. You know, so we're a large institutional trust fund. I mean, we have over $1 billion in the energy sector, about 4% of the trust fund. And so we've got, you know, almost $70 million in Exxon. We've got $56 million in Shell. We've got $48 million in Chevron, $8.5 million in One Oak, $5.5 million in Halliburton, for example. And all of those are U.S. equity managers, about a quarter of our portfolio. It's called passively investing, and you may be familiar with the term, but that just means they have to replicate. There's a Russell 3000 index, which is most of the large U.S. equity firms in the country. And so whatever percent, let's say, that Exxon is of that index, that's what our fund manager has to replicate. So they're not really doing a lot of investment decisions in terms of which companies, you know, to invest in, because if it's in the Russell 3000 and if Exxon makes up 0.5%, that's what we'll own in Exxon through that passive investing. So anyway, that's just a little bit of background. Just briefly talk about three concerns. One is that fiduciary definition, and we think the current law would make it very difficult to retain our current fund managers. And the way we read the bill, and I know attorneys read words different ways, but our attorneys think that if a company's doing anything in the ESG world, not with the KPERS money, but let's say maybe they have a fund sleeve that is ESG because they're responding to their clients' need who want to invest in ESG. Or maybe they have an ESG newsletter, all that. If they're doing anything in that ESG world, we think that would preclude us from doing business with them. And so I think that would be our concern. you get to the whole private equity. So if we have to start divesting, of course, alternative investments, private equity, if you pull out sooner than what you had promised your money was going to be with those private equity people, there's about a 20% discount. So we think, for example, that could cost us, if we had to divest quickly out of private equity, about $1 billion. And then you get into the assumptions, and there's lots of good assumptions. We have our investment consultant, our general investment consultant, our investment staff, and Bruce Finks here, our chief investment officer. We think we'd have to restructure the portfolio to comply with the bill as introduced. We think that mixed in, and over 10 years, we think the estimate's about $3.6 billion loss. But it's just an estimate, could be higher, could be lower, based on assumptions. So that's, anyway, that's a number. I guess the point is we think it would impact the trust fund. And so if I'm doing okay, just, no.
I'll give you some latitude.
Okay,
Alan.
thank you,
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah.
Chairman, I appreciate it. I guess the point is, so if you earn less money, you may know on KPERS funding, it's employee contributions, it's investment earnings, and then it's employer contributions. And what's the plug factor in a defined benefit plan? It's employer contributions. So if we're earning less on investments, that means the employers, state, and local units of government would have to contribute more. And then I'll just real briefly, and then the funding mix, the legislature and governors over the last 10 years really have done tremendous effort to improve the funding position of KPERS. Some bond issues, additional money, new plan design, all those things have improved the funded ratio, assets to liability to KPERS, and we're currently in the low 70%. We think, again, if we have to jettison our current fund mix right now, we think that would probably roll it back about to the low 60% and would be difficult. Proxy voting is an issue, but we think there's ways to deal with that. We could probably hire a firm to do that. And then the last one is just on indemnification of the board and the staff. So if anybody would say, wait a second, if should this bill pass, this would be language that would, I guess, protect the board for following the law, that somebody couldn't sue the KPERS board and say, wait a second, you aren't doing your sole fiduciary responsibility. Now you've got another reason. And I don't know. That's, again, our attorneys. And there's some language that was used before back in 2007 on Sudan investments. But anyway, the language there, I appreciate the time and certainly be pleased to respond to questions. And thanks for the
Yeah, I want to give the committee time to ask questions. Thank you, Alan. I appreciate that. And we'll probably ask a lot of questions, I would imagine. Next up, Ernie Claudel from the Kansas Coalition of Public Retirees and Kansas Association of Retired School Personnel. Ernie?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. I should also tell you that I am an elected member of the KPERS board, and I do not speak for them. I haven't had an opportunity to talk to all of you, but I have been what I call chasing KPERS since 2004, and have helped, was one of the founding members of the Kansas Coalition of Public Retirees, and 10 years I've been on elected member of the KPERS board. Somebody mentioned something that came to, on the humorous sports side, what came to me was they once asked Woody Hayes, the great notable or notorious, depending on which side of the fence you were, why he didn't pass the ball. And he said, well, there's only 3 things that can happen and when you pass the ball, and 2 of them are bad. My concern, having been involved with KPERS this long, is I've got 5 or 6 things I think could be bad, and I'm not sure what could be good, because there's too many uncertainties in this bill on what would be caused to happen. I also wanted to say, in the interest of my history on this thing, when I started teaching in 1969, my first principal talked to me about on coffee on Saturday mornings about the retired teachers he referred to them at the time politically incorrect today, but the little old ladies that taught years back and they weren't getting anything and they were terrible retirement program. And when I was gone to service, I actually think he had something to do with getting the old retirement system rolled into Capers. So, to make a point later, I would say also in my past life, I have had a securities license. So I have been involved in the investment world. Membership in Capers, roughly 333,000. And that varies from day to day, of course. But that's just the direct people. That's not the dependents. So you can, I'd say you can easily, for sure, double that by 2 to 600,000 people plus in the directly involved in the Kansas and Capers, and that's probably shy, a shy number because I'm sure most have more than one other dependent. One of the basic tenets, whenever you're investing money for something with somebody, you want them to understand that you must buy low and sell high. In this case, if we were the wording forced us to divest in some of these funds, this would be with the market as it is, that would be the antithesis of what you're supposed to do when it comes to investing. There would be losses caused by the fact that this is, in many cases, a 30 or 40-year investment and you were having to take your money out early. Also, the fact that this is not a good time to sell your investments and also what penalties might be involved. Speaking of the private investment, I did want to say one thing. Private investment is always a concern of the Capers Board. So public knowledge is that some of these hundreds of possibilities of investment, only 8 meet the standards that the advisors think is appropriate for such an organization. I do not know how many of those would be left if we added the other component, the CSG component in it. Over the years, Alan had mentioned the number of contributions that are made by the legislature in an attempt to shore up Capers. And since 2004, the extra contribution above the annual contributions amounts to $3.33 billion have been made to raise this to the present point.
About 30 seconds, Ernie.
Okay, so when Capers Board voted to move from 7%, 7.75 expected return to 7%, the loss to the unfunded liability was $1.33 billion, just that move. And it also lowered the average funded rate from 77.7% to 71.6%. So the uncertainty and the danger of this, as a Capers member and being involved for all these years, scares me to death because there's no guarantee on the outcome.
Thank you, Ernie. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And we'll open up the questions for all the opponent testimony. Next up, Timothy Graham from the Kansas National Education Association. Timothy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here before you today and testify. We obviously are opposing Senate Bill 291. I have submitted testimony. It's short and simple. I hope you'll read it, but I'm going to take my remarks in a different direction. And I'm talking quick so I can make my 5 minutes, but I do want to offer a couple disclaimers. Number one, I'm not looking forward to this testimony because it's not my nature to get snarky in front of a microphone. It may be my nature to be snarky out in the hallway, but up here, I believe in the process. I want to be respectful, and I want to be nice to everybody. But we're extremely frustrated about this whole debate. So I'm just letting you know right now. Number two, we are not testifying in favor of ESG. Okay, so we're not up here saying that that's going to save the world. The first thing I want to say in regards to the bill, it's our belief that KSA 72-4291 already covers the prohibition that we're looking to do. And Alan has alluded to that already in his testimony. In your bill, it's on page 6, line 42. So the rhetorical question is, why are we even doing this? And here I'm going to be a little bit snarky. Hope my friends with the bankers and the savings and loan will understand. But, I'm happy for them that they've been taken care of. But there's a lot of the rest of us that are affected by this that haven't been and that are very, very concerned about this. Police officers, firefighters, state employees, teachers, educators, and all other wage earners that depend on KPERS have all worked very hard to earn these benefits. How do any of these ESG bills not put their trust funds in jeopardy? We have a number of challenges to tackle in KPERS. We have widespread agreement in this legislature that Tier 3 is woefully inadequate and needs to be reformed. Retirees have been coming to this legislature for years and asking for a COLA. We have a lump sum death benefit that hasn't increased since 1993. And and before I get to this, those are three issues that we haven't done anything to address. Nothing real. We've looked at some Band-Aid approaches, but we haven't done anything real to tackle those things that real Kansans, not out-of-state conferees, but real Kansans are coming to you and asking for. You yourselves fought very, very hard to put billions of dollars back into the system to cover that funded ratio amount to make us solvent or make us considered solvent. This could reverse all of that. And so instead of attacking all these things that we've been talking about for years, we're here debating ESG. This is a national political debate that is orchestrated to do nothing but divide us. And it's filled with a bunch of incomplete information and sometimes misinformation. Eric still here? Eric testified earlier that the Kansas Chamber has been called woke. If that isn't misinformation, I don't know what is. I'm glad we're not debating 224 anymore. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, that was taken off of the calendar. And I do greatly appreciate the people that have been involved in 291 and 2436, because I know that you guys are making efforts. But again, these efforts look like an effort just to placate people. I've been up here 25 years, and oftentimes in the legislature, our biggest blunders have come when we're trying to placate a small group of legislators with bad ideas. A little hearing here, a little do-nothing bill there. It's a recipe for unintended consequences. Before I step away from this issue of ESG that obviously has got me shaken up, surely we can recognize that these ESG business practices have been going on for years. You like a Big Mac? Go to McDonald's, you still get that Big Mac in a styrofoam box? Nah, McDonald's they're fully in on saving the environment now. Go to a car dealership, go to the new car side of that dealership. In the window, you'll see that all the major manufacturers display a sticker in the window that not only addresses the cost of gas for the individual car you're buying, but also gives you greenhouse and smog ratings for that car, so you can know whether that car is friendly to the environment. And we haven't talked much about the S part of ESG, the social part, but Nike and Adidas have aggressively promoted the Black Lives Matter movement.
About 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll keep going. But I don't see their numbers lowering. And Hobby Lobby and Chick-fil-A, they've been closed on Sundays for years to promote Christian fellowship. They're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing this because it creates brand loyalty and it helps their bottom line. Let me close. We can't maximize profits if we mandate restraints. That is a paraphrase from our treasurer in the hearing just previously before this in regards to the sister bill to this to this legislation we're looking at. This bill is a restraint. On the issue of proxy voting, state contracts, political subdivisions, let all those folks cover their turf. But when you're talking about our pensions, teachers' pensions, please keep your social wars out of it. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Tim. Our final oral opponent testimony comes from Zach Pastora, the Kansas chapter of Sierra Club. Zach?
Thank you, Chairman. Zach Pastora, Kansas Sierra Club. We have about 5,000 members across the state that care about the environment. For a long time, we've considered environmental costs to be externalized costs, not considered as part of a good business investment strategy. So we're glad to be, and many of those environmental damages that we see across the country often get borne by taxpayers. So we're glad to see that more companies and more investment firms are thinking about non-financial, or I consider extra financial risks in terms of their business model, and thinking about ways they can make their investments more prudent and reduce risk. And so that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today, is that in our view, we oppose Senate Bill 291 because we view as environmental, social, and governance as a framework to help reduce risks, maximize profits, and help those businesses, entities, and those that buy into funds have a secured investment over the long term. And let's get a little bit more specific in what we're talking about here. We're talking about, as far as environment, we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions and the effect of pollution on the environment. We're thinking about energy efficiency. We're thinking about the water use. All those impact the land. We're all thinking about those things. A little bit more to say, is this company or business, is this investment going to have a liability or a vulnerability in the market long term? When we think about coal plants, we saw 50 coal company bankruptcies in the last decade, okay? And part of that's because of the pollution, the greenhouse gases, but also just the costs. We're getting more energy from alternative sources that don't use as much water, don't have pollution. On social, we don't talk too much about that. We're talking about treating the workers well, labor standards, human rights, data protection, privacy, and more. And on governance, making sure that we have good governing structures so we're not, companies aren't vulnerable to corruption or bribery, political suasion, and more. Let me just offer a final few comments here, if I may. We view 291 as unnecessary interference into the free market. The free market is trying to create a better risk assessment framework, more comprehensive, as I was talked about. 291 is essentially government intrusion upon that free market. So if you care about limited government, you might want to respect the opportunity of the free market to decide what is a prudent investment and a better risk assessment strategy and what's not. I know we're running out of time here, but I might just say that in our view that this isn't worth the risk. There's not enough reward in 291 or any of the ESG policies put forth worth the risk of pensions that the people of the state have earned. And we're talking about 1/3 Kansans. We're talking about losses and disrupting our system right now. It's too much at risk for what reward to the Kansas economy? I don't think that was articulated very well yesterday on the real financial impact loss that we have with these ESG policies. You can see from other states that interest rates have gone up. That was talked a little bit about, but I've included in my testimony some analysis from other states on the hundreds of millions of dollars in potential costs from these policies. I have a lot more that I could go into, but I'll just leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. And is there any more oral opponent testimony in the audience? Seeing none, I think we have written only opponent from 3 different folks there, committee. So I'm going to open it up to questions for any of our opponents. And Senator Longbein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are for Alan. Alan, I read a news article this morning, and not that I don't trust my media people, but I'd like to go through some of it, maybe hear it firsthand. You're quoted as saying that this bill could potentially cause a loss of up to $3.6 billion in current and future investment returns.
That's correct. That was a correct quote, and and it's an estimate, 10-year projection, a lot of assumptions. But yes, 3.6 billion is what our investment professionals think it could be, potentially be the impact.
So if that's the case, that wipes out $1.5 billion in bonding that this legislature has done in the last 10 years. It wipes out $1 billion that we put in the fund last year, and would wipe out another $1 billion that we're considering putting into Capers this year. Wow. Our funding ratio, you and I and a number of others have worked very, very closely. This is my 10th year of chairing pensions in the Senate. We've worked very, very hard to get our funding ratio up, and I think our high got close to 78%. The Capers board, that argument can be made, whether that was the correct decision. I'm sure the Capers board did a lot of deliberation when they lowered the expected rate of return to 7, but that dropped us to 70 approximately. And so this would now drop us to 60, which would be the worst in the country.
No, it would get us back to perhaps in terms of sort of modern numbers on that funded ratio, assets, liabilities. Our low point was 56% back a little bit before 2012. So we would roll back. And again, just in the pension world, if that funded ratio, assets, liabilities, if you're below 60%, then something better be going on, changes, because the red lights are flashing, signs are going off, and something needs to be done, because if there's a major recession, and so investments go down, then you're really in a tough spot.
So back in the 2010 and 2012 area under Governor Brownback, he sounded the alarms on our funded ratio and challenged this legislature to do something about it. And this could potentially wipe out all of that?
I think based on again, these projections or assumptions, that's right. We would roll back, we would step back 10 years and step back 10 years of progress, to the credit of legislatures and governors who have really stepped up to try to improve the funded position of Capers.
One more. You and I have had conversations about proxy votes, but I don't know that the committee has. And so in you and I's discussion of what it would take to bring proxy voting back in-house, and that's 90 to 100,000 votes per year?
Correct.
Approximately?
Right about 100,000, yes.
And your estimation that you've shared with me would be somewhere between 8 and 12 full-time employees.
That's correct.
That are investment grade employees, so $80,000 to $120,000.
Probably the higher end of that, yes.
Higher end of that. So bringing proxy votes in-house could cost us $1 million to $1.2 million per year.
And probably maybe even a little bit more because of the framework and the software and all those things that they need to support that staff. It could get upwards maybe as high as $2 million.
We've also had discussions about services. We could employ services. $750,000 to $800,000 a year.
Yes, in fact, we just met with one of those proxy voting services as the industry responds to meeting the needs, and we just talked to them last week, and we didn't get an exact quote, but our guess is it's probably, and what's in the fiscal note, maybe in that neighborhood of 750,000, maybe a little less, but in that area. So for the proxy service company to vote the proxies rather than having the fund managers do it.
Looks like there's a lot of squeeze to get a little bit of juice.
Questions? Senator Fausto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've served on this committee for about 12 years now, and normally we don't have this type of hearings and this topic in this committee. So it's been really enlightening today. I appreciate Zach's comment. Appreciate Alan Conroy. You know, we all respect and value your opinion. Mr. Chairman, my question is for Tim Graham. You brought up some great points, and I've been here, I don't want to, well, maybe about 20 years. And I still have constituents that ask about the cost of living increases. Can you tell us the last time that occurred for our
1997.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. So would that be another reason why you oppose the legislation? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, no, but one of the points I make is why are we messing around with this when we have real issues that we need to tackle? I mean, it's not a reason to oppose the legislation. We oppose the legislation because of what we're afraid that it could do to the trust fund. We'd rather you guys be working on other issues, the issues that your constituents are actually coming to you and asking you to tackle. I haven't had a fireman, a policeman, a teacher, an educator, anybody come up and say, hey, protect us from those woke green energy folks.
Sure. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is also for you, Tim. In your testimony, you state that the KNEA believes that monies paid into retirement funds by the Kansas education employees should be invested in a manner that guarantees the highest yield of safe return. What does the KNEA consider highest yield, and what do they consider safe return?
Well, safe return would be without any type of interference from people that don't know what they're doing, right? We trust KPERS. KPERS, before we had to go to Tier 3, KPERS was one of the best retirement pension plans in the United States. It was considered that way. It's been around since 1961. And we want the professionals to be allowed to do their job. It's the same argument that so many of us make on so many different issues when certain legislators want to do what I would call mission creep, or AKA get out of their lane. This is a way of the legislature, who may have 2 or 3 financial managers that serve, are telling the experts how to invest our money. And this is money that's already been earned. This is money that is already applied to them. So when we talk about safe investments and the best investments, those happen when experts are doing the job without constraints.
Follow up? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so you're telling me that an individual teacher could take that same money and invest it in the stock market on their own and be guaranteed the same rate of return with their KPERS?
Probably not.
It's a great possibility that they could lose everything. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Alan Calmer. Thank you very much for coming, and it's interesting, this whole debate of everything was going on, and Senator Lombine brought some points up that was in there. We could possibly lose $3 billion or whatever the estimation. My question is, how could that happen? What in this legislation could cause that scenario that would go that way? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Excellent question. And I guess the way we read the bill, and again, we have our own attorneys, so they're poring over the bill, interpreting it. And so the way we read it is, if a company is doing anything in the ESG world, not with KPERS money, but maybe perhaps they have a fund sleeve that is ESG for customers that want to invest in ESG. Or maybe their CEO has taken a strong viewpoint on ESG and is out espousing that viewpoint. Or maybe they have newsletters, whatever it is. in the ESG world, if that fund manager, if those companies, fund managers are active in that area, then we don't believe, based on the current law or the current proposed bill, that we could do business with them. So they would violate the provisions of the bill, and so we would have to withdraw our business from them.
Follow-up, yes.
Thank you. And so, let's say that that is correct. Well, then couldn't you put your money into another? I just don't understand how you could lose that much money. That's my concern. I can understand not doing business with that company that's making it. Thank you.
And I think then, I think eventually the free market would develop. And of course, as a large institutional investor, we want large investment managers that have that institutional size experience and knowledge and charge fees accordingly, because I'm not sure we want to take our monies from let's say, a major fund manager that we currently have and maybe give it to a startup company that may have a lot of good qualities, but maybe they aren't tested yet. And maybe over time they'll get there. But I think that fiduciary responsibility of the board says, we want established fund managers, have a track record, have competitive rates, and so that's what we'd look for. And I'm not sure, if the bill passes, we'll certainly do everything to seek those out, but I'm not sure they're there yet. They might get there over time, because again, I think free market, those companies will respond to the need eventually.
Senator Holscher? Sounds like it.
Thank you very much. In regard to potential loss with trust funds, and maybe this was addressed in Senator Longbine's questions, the $3.6 billion, we'll be talking overall, we're talking, I just want to make sure I understood.
That would be over the course of the 10 years. So that's the estimate based on our best experts that we have that work. So yes. Yep.
Don't tell.
Senator Cluse?
Yes, thank you.
Senator Cluse, there we go.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is probably for Tim. Not really a question, just response to some of your statements made. I would consider myself new guy on the block yet, learning, haven't been in legislation very long. We have a lot of bills, a lot of different things that we hear in these committees and things that get debated on the floor, and to just say we're wasting our time on these, I don't think that's valid. I think we do have had a lot of people reach out. I think good debate. I think you're very knowledgeable. I think today has been very good hearing. I mean, a lot of people here are more knowledgeable than I am, but there's also practical wisdom that we have to look at as well, and that's helping people come to an understanding and a perception. So this healthy debate is good, and this debate alone can shift not just state opinion, but national opinion, to where people can think things through and make the decisions. I don't like government dictating to me. I don't think anybody in this room really likes that, but at the same time, I feel like, this is not a waste of time. I feel like this is something that we're addressing, like some other bills and things here that we've been addressing. And so just a few thoughts in response to some of your comments towards our committee today. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. And that's why I started out with my disclaimer. I don't want anybody to feel like I'm disrespecting this process, but we feel backed in a corner. Yeah, this is a healthy debate, and I know there are members of this legislature that really believe this is a big issue. My opinion and the opinion of my association would be that this is just another spoon-fed issue that is designed to divide. And though there's probably room and a need to have this discussion, it would be a lot easier for us to swallow that if you guys were tackling the other issues that we've been bugging you guys on for years.
Senator. And I appreciate that. Just to follow up, I haven't been here in other years, but what I can say is this is an important issue to a lot of people, like I said, statewide, national-wise, and this healthy debate in this time is important, and so that's what I'll leave it at. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
And I appreciate being part of it.
Okay. I have a couple questions for Alan, if I could. Thanks, Alan. With regard to those losses you're talking about, 1.4 billion, 3.6 billion over the number of the year, you're talking about the private equity funds that you would have to divest, and that BlackRock is actually managing, correct?
On the private equity, that's the 1.14 billion.
1.14,
BlackRock,
yes.
we don't have anything, BlackRock's not involved in the private equity side. They are on the passive investments, so on U.S. equities. So they'd be involved in the $3.6 billion number. Again, estimate 10 years. But yes, BlackRock is there in those passive investments.
So with those investments, you basically are admitting that you have ESG funds there because you're saying you would have to divest.
I think it'd probably be because the language in the bill we think would cause us to divest, because I think the language says if a company's doing anything in ESG, for example, if a CEO of a company was sharing his or her viewpoints on the value of ESG investing, we think that would be a tripwire we'd have to get out. Again, if they have a ESG sleeve of investments for those people that want that, we think this language would prohibit us from staying in there, even if it didn't hit Capers investments, but because of whatever activity that company was doing.
So if you had time to unwind, for example, the private equity side, to where, because a lot of those investments, it's been 3 or 4 years since I passed my Series 6 and Series 7 investment advisor test, so bear with me. But 4 to 7 years, I think, is what's average for them to unwind those type of investments. If we were to allow that time to unwind those illiquid private investments, then you would expect those losses to maybe go away.
Yes, on the 1.14 billion, that, I mean, if we have that time, so we didn't have to exit prematurely, and I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years, but in that longer time frame, depending on, of course, when we've gotten into them here recently. But yes, that would address the concern on the 1.1 billion.
And with regard to the ESG investments, there are other advisors that can handle those investments that are sort of hands-off, that BlackRock is handling, correct?
Well, then we'd have to see, yeah, again, do they, again, based on the language, are they doing any of those other things in the ESG world? Again, not with our money, but in their broader operation or business.
I think we're looking at the investments that they have in ESG, and with regard to the fact that, again, as we heard from the treasurer, most of those are underperforming. On the proxy voting, do you use ISS now?
Not to vote our proxies. We get a little service where they do provide us some information, but it's like $15,000 a year. So they're not voting our proxy. It'd be our fund manager. So we aren't directly using ISS to vote proxies, no.
But there are other proxy advisors, and there are ESG neutral proxy advisors. In other words, those that try to avoid that.
We just had a meeting last week with one, I believe, that would fit that criteria to see kind of the services they would be able to provide.
And with regard to the fiduciary portion of it, if someone is investing in an underperforming asset, such as an ESG type of an asset, would you agree that they're not necessarily doing their fiduciary duty?
We also always look at performance, and of course, and as you know probably from your background, then it's the time frame. So are you looking back 2 years? Are you looking back 5 years? And how long do you give that fund manager if they are underperforming right now? What are the reasons? What's going on? Are they heavily invested in tech, and now tech's down, but maybe energy's up, or vice versa, whatever, to understand kind of what's that. But yes, our investment staff spends a great deal of time monitoring those returns and then the underlying reasons on overperformers or underperformers.
Then my final question would be, we were here and here between the opponents and proponents, and to be honest, we haven't brought you guys into the fray. Would you be willing to sit down with our treasurer and see if we can't work out something that reduces the heartburn for you and for the Capers investors and retirees, and see if we can't get language that fits the bill?
Absolutely, we'd welcome that.
Okay, we'll see if we can't arrange that and get everybody into a room. Senator Cluse, did you have one final question?
Well, more of a statement. And Alan, I appreciate your testimony, and this has been real helpful. I spent quite a bit of time in real estate over the years, went through the 08, 09 housing crash, the heartburn of that. We talk about it. A lot of colleagues lost a lot of money. I know what it's like to lose money. So, you know, as we look at this whole ESG and all the dynamics with it, you know, I just think, as Senator had just said, Mr. Chairman, inviting people into the conversation would be good to find a resolve. But I just think it's important that we deep dive and look at all this so we can try to bring a resolve that we can all be beneficial. No one likes to lose money, you know, and we need to learn from our past mistakes in the 08 housing market. So thank you.
Committee, I think before we even decide to work this bill, we'll get the parties back together, see what we can do, and then try to circle around with everyone so that we kind of allay anyone's fears if that works out for everyone. So I appreciate that. I don't think there's any more business for us today. Thank you for your patience, and we are adjourned.